For a long time now, it's been a widely accepted and rarely questioned belief that a strong corporate culture goes hand in hand with success. However, a recent study has cast some doubt on this principle. After all, the authors of the report argue for culture. A company's build-up may be strong, but wrong. There is little point in every employee marching to the same tune if they are all marching in the wrong direction.
Also, malaria is something that is a very complex disease with this complex life cycle. That means that if you're going to eliminate it, you have to be able to target cute parasites and humans. You have to be able to target parasites in the mosquitoes, that mosquito population. And so that requires a lot of resources. It requires really good planning, and a health system across all these different levels. And so I think the political capital that you need for that, the educational infrastructure you need for that, the economic resources you need for that are quite a challenge.
The World Health Organization says 12 years ago, India alone was responsible for almost 70% of all polio cases around the world. It calls India's success against polio one of the most significant achievements in public health. WHO officials say India's accomplishment proved the crippling disease can be eliminated in even the most challenging circumstances with a strong political commitment. The number of polio cases has decreased from an estimated 350,000 a year to 33 since the WHO launched its global eradication campaign in 1988.
Heavy rains are expected to fall in a few weeks. Aid agencies are racing to shore up flimsy shelters and stabilize shaky terrain before the monsoon season begins. The UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, says the work ahead is monumental, but preparations are off to a better start this year than last. Aid agencies last year had to deal with the massive influx of more than 740,000 Rohingya refugees fleeing violence and persecution in Myanmar. They arrived over a period of a few months, straining local resources and requiring vast amounts of humanitarian assistance.
In an effort to encourage the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or North Korea, to dismantle its nuclear weapons program, the United Nations Security Council last year passed Resolution 2375, which imposes sanctions on North Korea. The United States is determined to strictly implement this resolution. Members of the UN Security Council, and by extension all UN member states, have unanimously agreed to fully enforce sanctions on North Korea, and we expect them to continue to honor those commitments, said Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
The US and South Korea announced late Saturday the two countries will end annual large-scale joint military exercises as part of diplomatic efforts to achieve complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. In a statement, the Pentagon said Acting Secretary of Defense Patrick Shanahan and South Korea Minister of National Defense in a phone call Saturday decided to end the Key Resolve and Foal Eagle series of exercises. The decision comes 3 days after a summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Vietnam that ended without an agreement to resolve the North Korean nuclear crisis. Seoul's defense ministry released a similar statement, according to the Associated Press.
The U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, recently announced additional assistance to support achieving the goals outlined in the Bilateral Development Objectives Assistance Agreement between the U.S. and Nigerian governments signed in 2015. $25 million will strengthen good governance by supporting state governments' efforts to bolster Nigeria's open government partnership, commitments to improve transparency and fight corruption. An additional $1.5 million will support a healthier, more educated population in targeted states through the U.S. President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, also known as PEPFAR, for a total of $26.5 million in additional assistance.
Spanish police say they have identified the driver of the van that mowed down crowds walking along Barcelona's main tourist street last Thursday, killing 13 people. They haven't named him, but he's understood to be Younes Abouyakoub, a 22-year-old born in Morocco. Police say he may have fled the country. A South African court has given permission for an online auction of rhino horns, despite a global trade ban. The authorities have tried to stop the 3-day auction. There's a great demand for rhino horns in Vietnam and China with their use in traditional medicines. The South African government has confirmed that it granted diplomatic immunity to Zimbabwe's First Lady, Grace Mugabe, enabling her to return home despite being accused of assaulting a model in Johannesburg. The government said it was imperative to maintain good relations with Zimbabwe.
Thais waited Monday for the results of an election called a return to democratic rule, but which has been widely criticized as an exercise designed by Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha to entrench his military's stranglehold on power. Preliminary official results released late Sunday showed that with 93% of ballots counted, the military-backed Phalang Pracharar party was in the lead with about 7.6 million votes. That's short of what would be needed for a majority in parliament. In second place was the Pheu Thai party of former Prime Minister Vanessa with 7.1 million votes. The campaign was marred by allegations of vote buying. However, complaints were few on polling day, with election observers from Australia, Canada, the United States and the 10 members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations on hand.
India has downplayed the impact of US plans to end New Delhi's preferential trade status that allows duty-free access to products worth $5.6 billion. Saying that India has not assured the United States that it will provide equitable and reasonable access to its markets, US President Donald Trump has directed the US Trade Representative's office to remove India from a program that grants it preferential trade treatment. In 2017, India was the biggest beneficiary of the Generalized System of Preferences, GSP, which lowers duties on exports from about 120 developing countries. The Indian Commerce Secretary told reporters in New Delhi that India has no plans to impose retaliatory tariffs on US goods.
China is stepping up its efforts, so announcing a long-awaited plan to link up its southern Pearl River Delta into a massive hub of technology, research, finance, and innovation. The possibilities and challenges of the project are both equally challenging and promising, according to analysts. Some describe the plan as an attempt to create a megacity to rival Silicon Valley, the U.S. technology powerhouse that is home to companies such as Google, Facebook, and Apple. But while Silicon Valley has a population of 3.1 million, the Greater Bay Area will link up 9 cities together with Hong Kong and Macau with a total population of about 70 million, and the economic heft, state media argues, to drive the Chinese economy, let alone the world.
The authorities in the Spanish city of Barcelona say 13 people have been killed and 80 injured by a van, which deliberately drove into them at a popular tourist market. The vehicle moved at speed through Los Ramblas in the city center, before being abandoned by the driver who ran away. Hundreds of tourists and local people took shelter in shops and churches, as police searched for suspects. Hours later, 2 of them, including a man of Moroccan origin, were arrested. Spanish media say another suspect was killed in a police shootout on the outskirts of the city. The Spanish Prime Minister, Mariano Rajoy, who is on his way to Barcelona, says he will be coordinating efforts to reinforce security, while the Catalan president, Carles Puigdemont, has called for solidarity.
Two former U.S. Republican presidents, George Bush Sr. and his son, George W., have called on Americans to reject racism and antisemitism. It's being seen as a rebuke to Donald Trump for his comments about who was responsible for clashes in Charlottesville on Saturday. Mr. Trump sparked fury when he again blamed both anti-racist protesters and white supremacists. One demonstrator, Heather Heyer, was killed. At her memorial service, her mother said the killer had wanted to silence her daughter, but had ended up magnifying her. President Trump has announced his dismantling 2 advisory panels made mainly of senior business figures. Several resigned in the controversy over the U.S. leader's reaction to events in Charlottesville.
First, though, family members, politicians, historians and civil rights advocates are paying tribute to Colin Powell, an American military and political leader who passed away Monday at age 84. Powell had an extraordinary resume dating all the way back to his work in the Reserve Officers Training Corps while he was in college. At that time, Powell had attained the ROTC's highest rank and he continued to advance his military career from there. Powell served in combat during the Vietnam War and became a four-star general in the U.S. Army. During the presidency of Ronald Reagan, Powell became America's first black national security advisor. Under President George H.W. Bush, Powell became the first African-American chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, the country's highest-ranking military officer.
The US government says it's made progress in an effort to relieve some of the shipping problems that have clogged up the international supply chain. The government does not control that chain. It's largely made up of private port operators, trucking companies, railroads and warehouses, but the Biden administration is putting its support behind a plan for the Port of Los Angeles to operate 24/7 and for large companies like Walmart, Home Depot and UPS to ship more goods at night. California's Port of Los Angeles is one of the most congested ports on Earth. 40% of all the containers shipped to America come through here and at the Port of Long Beach. Economic analysts and trade leaders say this is a step in the right direction, but that it won't make a major impact in supply problems.